I'm nitpicking because the right answer shouldn't have anything to nitpick. So if there's stuff to nitpick, that means the answer is probably wrong. I know why you clicked on this video, and it's because you're struggling with the reading and writing section of the digital SAT. I've been there. I used to be a really slow reader. I'm actually still a really slow reader. My vocab is terrible. I don't know how to spell, and I'm still able to score a 770. Why is that? By the way, my name is Ari Morrison. I'm an SAT coach, and my mission is to help students like you crush it on the SAT so that you open up huge opportunities in life. I realize that there's basically 15 question types, and if you develop a consistent approach to solving each one, you have a much better chance of success. All right, let's start with cross-text connections. The way that I recommend going through this is, first I would read the question. This one says, based on the text, how would the author of text 1 most likely respond to the proponents of the philosophical stance outlined in text 2? So we're curious about the author of text 1's opinion, how he would respond, or she. So I would recommend reading text 1 first to get into the mindset of that author, and then kind of like try to embody that author in your mind. Now, if it had said, how would the author of text 2 most likely respond to something in text 1, then I would recommend reading text 2 first. So we have to approach this in a flexible way. I would strongly recommend reading the one first that is the one responding. Okay, text 1. Philosopher G.E. Moore's most influential work entails the concept of common sense. Okay, so this guy writes about common sense. He asserts that there are certain beliefs that all people, including philosophers, know instinctively to be true. Could we think of an example? Maybe that like life is important, like people want to live or value life. Know instinctively to be true, whether or not they profess otherwise. Among them, so we're going to have an example that they have bodies. So we all believe that we have bodies, so that's like common sense, I guess. Or that they exist in a world with other objects that have 3 dimensions. Okay, like this cell phone or got post-its. Those are all 3-dimensional things. Moore's careful work on common sense may seem obvious, but it was in fact groundbreaking. Okay, that's kind of like, I would argue that's like the central claim of this thing. Like, this might seem really obvious, but actually it's not. It's groundbreaking. Why? I don't know, but apparently, according to text 1, it is. Okay, so we're looking for him to respond to proponents of the philosophical stance outlined in text 2. So let's see what the philosophical stance is in text 2. That's what we're looking out for. It's important to understand what you're looking for in the text. That's kind of an underrated thing. External world skepticism is a philosophical stance supposing that we cannot be sure of the existence of anything outside our own minds. Okay, so that already kind of contradicts this idea that we know we have bodies, or we know that we live in a world with other things. During the lecture, G.E. Moore once offered a proof refuting this stance by holding out his hands and saying, "Here is one hand, and here is another." Right? You could picture that. Many philosophers reflexively reject this proof, but have found it a challenge to articulate exactly why the proof fails. So, um, so basically, this text is saying that sorry about that. This first guy argues that we do have bodies and we do have things outside of ourselves, but text 2 is kind of saying like we sort of we have people that disagree with that, but we can't really say why we disagree. Okay, based on the text, so the text 1 guy, I'm thinking he's going to be like, you idiots, you can't, the whole thing is like, you can't explain, um they have found it a challenge to articulate exactly why the proof fails. Maybe this guy would say, you can't articulate why it fails um, because it doesn't fail. Because maybe this actually is a good proof. The text 1 guy, again, is a proponent of this philosophical idea that we do have things outside of ourselves. So let's see what the answer choices say. So this one says, by agreeing with those proponents that Moore's treatment of positions that contradict his own is fundamentally unserious. By agreeing with those proponents that Moore's treatment of positions, so Moore is this guy, that his treatments of positions that contradict his own is fundamental. No, definitely not A. Okay. A is wrong because it's basically criticizing Moore. And text 1 is a fan of GE more, right? It seems to be, because it says that it's groundbreaking. So we're pro Moore, and A is anti Moore by saying that Moore is kind of unserious, or that his treatment of positions against his own are unserious. Okay, B says by suggesting that an instinctive distaste for Moore's position is preventing external world skeptics from constructing a sufficiently rigorous refutation of Moore. I love this answer. I'm guessing this is going to be the right answer, um, because it's supporting Moore and saying that his opponents are kind of foolish. His opponents, Moore's position is preventing external world skeptics from constructing a sufficiently rigorous refutation of Moore. They can't really argue against Moore. Okay, they have an instinctive distaste for him, but they don't have like a real argument against him. I think that's probably what the text one guy would say. Okay, let's just read on. By arguing that if it is valid to assert that some facts are true based on instinct, it's also valid to assert that some proofs are inadequate based on instinct. That's a little bit of a stretch. That's probably beyond the text. That's not really supported by anything in text one to say that we can reject a proof just based on instinct. I understand the appeal of C, and I'm guessing C is a really good trap answer because it seems kind of like in the same tone, but it's definitely wrong because it goes well beyond anything that's in text one. Okay, by pointing out that Moore would assert that external world skepticism is at odds with other beliefs those proponents must unavoidably hold. That's interesting. Now, external world skepticism, let's see what it is again, is a philosophical stance supposing that we cannot be sure of the existence of anything outside of our own minds. And he would say, we all know that we do have things outside of our own minds, like our bodies and like physical objects like this glass. I keep showing different things. I think D is the right answer now. So B was a trap answer, and D is indubitably the right answer. Now let's go back and figure out what was wrong with B, because that surprises me, because I felt good about B when I first read it, but then when I read D, I was like, by suggesting that an instinctive distaste for Moore's position is preventing external world skeptics from constructing a sufficiently rigorous refutation of Moore. This is definitely supportable in the text. How would the author of text one most likely respond to the proponents of the philosophical stance? So, okay, I see a couple of potential issues with B. Of course, there's a little bit of hindsight bias going on here because now I feel like the answer is D. But potential issues with B. He's not really addressing the philosophical stance here. We're not really addressing external world skepticism. It's more just like a defense of Moore. Secondly, an instinctive distaste for Moore's position is preventing external world skeptics. He's kind of using things in text 2, and we're not really using things from text 1. So text 2 is the thing that says that many philosophers reflexively reject this proof. We don't know if the person in text 1 agrees with that, right? Maybe the text 2 author feels that way. This is actually probably a little bit, this is more in line with what text 2 believes and not what text 1 believes. So that's interesting. Either way, big picture, when we're talking about how to approach these types of problems, start with text 1 so that we could think from that perspective, and then read text 2 in that mindset of like, oh, I'm the text 1 author. How would I respond? Okay. Onward. More craft and structure. This one is text structure and purpose. Okay. So which choice best describes the overall structure? This was kind of a groundbreaking thing that I realized when going through these problems. When you're dealing with overall structure problems, the answer choices basically match one-to-one with the passage. What do I mean by that? I'm just going to read the first like 2 sentences of this, and you'll hopefully see what I'm talking about. Why do sandcats purr but lions roar? Okay, so we're opening with a question. Researchers hypothesize means they're not sure, but they're guessing, that this difference between the 2 feline species may be partly due to the U-shaped bone in their throats called the hyoid. Okay, so we have a question, and then we have like a proposed answer. hypothesis. Okay, let's read the beginning of every answer choice. The text presents a theory about two species. Okay, that's reasonable. It's a hypothesis. Theory, hypothesis could sometimes be used synonymously. So A could be right. The text compares the habitats of two species. Okay, so far we have nothing about their habitats. So I'm inclined to cross out B. It's possible they're going to get into habitats soon, but we could kind of just skim the next sentence. Yada yada. I don't see anything about their habitats, so I'm pretty sure B is wrong. The text describes a behavior shared by two species. Absolutely not. It's not shared. One purrs, one roars. It's not shared. The text poses a question about two species, then presents a possible answer. Okay, this might be right because we start with a question, then we have a possible answer. What we have to do now, we've narrowed it down to A and D. Let's see what happens next. Are we going to keep discussing the possible answer, or are we going to discuss facts that weaken it? Which one is going to happen next? So, sandcats, which are much smaller than lions, have a rigid hyoid that rumbles when the cat's larynx vibrates, resulting in a purr. By contrast, lions have somewhat flexible hyoid, yada yada. These traits allow lions and most other species of big cats to produce powerful roars, yada yada. We're never really weakening the claim. This never really happens. So D has to be the right answer. Now, what's great about this approach is that you often don't need to read the whole text, or you could often just skim major parts of the text because we were able to eliminate two answers so quickly that at the end we just had to decide between two other answers. And sometimes with easier questions, you'll be able to eliminate three answers really quickly, and you'll be really happy when you can do that. Okay, this one is main purpose. Main purpose problems, I strongly recommend reading the entire thing and trying to understand it as well as you possibly can. Because when we're dealing with the main purpose of the text, it's like, what does the author want your takeaway to be? And especially if it's a shorter passage like this, just read the whole thing. Okay, today composer Scott Joplin, I thought I was going to talk about Janis Joplin. Scott Joplin, I have no idea who that is mainly celebrated for his catchy ragtime pieces Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer. Never heard of either of them, but apparently he's famous for them. He's celebrated. However, by overlooking his less famous works, listeners will miss the full range of Joplin's creativity. Okay, so there's a bunch of underrated stuff that we're ignoring to our own detriment. For instance, his waltz Pleasant Moments and his opera whatever skillfully blend ragtime and classical music. There's other good stuff out there. These masterpieces deserve as much fame as Joplin's biggest hits. Clearly, the author is like, look at his more underrated stuff. Right? That's the tone. We've all got texts from our friends that are like, bro, like you're missing all the good stuff. Um whatever. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Which choice best states the main purpose? I'm looking for an answer that's something to like encourage people to like pay attention to his more underrated work. Okay, describe the similarities and differences between ragtime music and opera. Absolutely not. To argue that more attention should be given to Joplin's lesser known works. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. That's like basically what I just said. I promise I didn't read ahead. Okay, to encourage music lovers to listen to music by many different composers. No, this whole thing's about Scott Joplin. To explain how Joplin learned to compose and perform ragtime music. If it mentioned that at all, it was in passing because that was not the main purpose. Remember, you don't just need to answer something that is true. You need to answer something that answers the question. The main purpose, the clear like overarching theme was we should pay attention to his lesser known work. So main purpose questions, read the whole thing, try to understand it well, and try to understand the takeaway. I get that that's not really a hack, that's not really a trick, but you have to approach each problem type in the way that's going to help you get the right answer. And in my opinion, this is the way to try to get the right answer. Okay, still in craft and structure land. I think this is the nope. We have one more after this. There's a lot to look into in craft and structure, but I promise it's going to get lighter as we get toward the end. Text structure and purpose. Which choice best describes the function of the underlying portion of the text in the text as a whole? Okay, this is a very classic problem type that you see usually very early on the SAT. And we need to understand like what is this underlying portion doing in the text. I would recommend usually reading everything before and a little bit after. Um, you'll kind of see why, because I think you need some context to understand what this line is doing. because remember, it's in the text as a whole. It's not just what does this line literally mean. We have to understand its function. What is it doing? Okay. Scholarly accounts of the Chicano movement, a movement that advocated for the social, political, and cultural empowerment of Mexican Americans and reached its zenith, yada yada, in the 60s and 70s. So basically, scholarly accounts of this movement that celebrated Mexican Americans tend to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures in the movement. Ooh, interesting. So I'm already trying to predict what's going to happen next. I'm thinking if we're focusing on the most militant and outspoken figures, it might lead to a more negative connotation about the people in the Chicano movement. Like maybe people will think of them as uh, like crazy hooligans when most of them were actually like peaceful. Let's. I'm just guessing. Okay, making it seem uniformly radical. Ah, I'm a genius. Okay, so what is this doing? What's the function of the underlying portion in the text as a whole? Basically, this is setting up this idea that it's setting up kind of like a problem with the way scholars view the Chicano movement. And it's showing how it'll give the wrong impression. Okay, it presents a trend in scholarship on the Chicano movement that the text claims has been reevaluated by researchers in light of. Okay, so I think we're going to have to read on a little bit to figure out if that's true. So far, A starts off nicely. So let's keep reading. Geographer Juan Herrera has shown, however, that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifested in comparatively low profile neighborhoods, institutions, and projects, so if we look at other aspects of the movement or other parts of it, we see participants espousing an array of political orientations and approaches to community activism. So they're not all radical, basically. So this line is saying, like, there's a bunch of scholars that are saying that this movement is radical, but actually, if we look deeper, it's not. Okay, it presents a trend in scholarship on the Chicano movement that the text claims has been reevaluated by researchers. Ooh, this is a big claim. Has it been re-evaluated by researchers? Geographer Juan Herrera has shown that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifests in comparatively low-profile neighborhoods, um, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's being re-evaluated by researchers. It's being re-evaluated by Juan Herrera in light of Herrera's work on the movie. Yeah, A I'm putting on probation. A is like I'm not crossing it out, but I'm troubled by this line, re-evaluated by researchers, because it's re-evaluated by Juan Herrera, and it says if we shift our focus, but I imagine that's talking about the readers like us. So stay tuned. Okay, it identifies an aspect of the Chicano movement that the text implies was overemphasized by scholars due to their own political orientations. Okay, so far we're good. It's overemphasized by scholars. This is the part that's like, whoa, baby. Is that in the text? Does it say anything about these scholars' political orientations? I think not. I think not. B is out. This is outside the text. It starts off, it's like two truths and a lie, you know? Look out for this on the SAT. This is also level 3 difficultio. Okay. It describes a common approach to studying the Chicano movement that, according to the text, obscures the ideological diversity of the movement's participants. I love this. C is great. It describes a common approach. It's common because scholarly accounts tend to focus. So this is definitely a common approach. According to the text, it obscures the diversity. Yeah, we see participants espousing an array. Array is like a bunch of different types of political orientations. So I think C is golden. But let's look at D, because sometimes we get surprised. It summarizes the conventional method for analyzing the Chicano movement, so far so good, which the text suggests creates a misleading impression of the effectiveness of neighborhood institutions and projects. So this one starts off nicely. It goes a little off the rails when it talks about the effectiveness of neighborhood institutions and projects. There's no real discussion about how effective this movement was. So you see, like, what makes this one like a level 3 difficulty as opposed to some of the others is that all of the answers kind of start off well, like they all say something that's true, and then a lot of the stuff afterwards is like subtly false. It's like stuff that's like a bit of a leap, a bit outside the text. Not necessarily the case. So Hopefully you understand kind of how I'm looking at this. I would say like when you're dealing with a hard version of this problem, you're probably going to have to read the whole thing. Like when you're dealing with those problems that are like questions like 10 to 15, or you're in the hard module too, very often you're going to have to read the whole thing to understand it because all of these answer choices reference the beginning and the end of the text. So you can't get away with any tricks of like reading the first sentence and last sentence or only reading the underlined text. You're just not going to get away with it. Okay. Craft and structure, words and context. This, full disclosure, this is the section that I struggle the most with tutoring because I have not found a consistent way to help students get better at vocabulary. And I would say, like, when I was taking the SAT in high school, my vocab was not great. I think now that I'm older, I'm just like 27 years old and I've been alive longer. I think my vocabulary is expanded enough that I don't very often come across words that I don't know on the SAT, but I sympathize with those of you that do. And um, honestly, like if you have a good resource or a good method that you think maybe like I haven't seen that you think will help someone with vocab, drop it in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious because I have not found a great solution to this. Let's take a quick look. I don't think there's a lot of tricks with vocab. That's the long and short of it. I don't think there's a lot of tricks. I think you could try to figure out what words mean if you don't know them using context, using um, like parts within the word. But I don't think that's even like the most consistent or like easy approach. Economists often assert that countries looking to increase their reliance on solar energy should expand their capacity for storage. Having an ample reserve of stored energy can mitigate the effects of blank solar energy collection caused by unpredictable shifts in cloud cover. So it seems like maybe inconsistent solar energy collection because it's unpredictable shifts in cloud cover and haze. So I want to say inconsistent. Yeah, fluctuations. That's probably right. Um, the other answers don't really make any sense. I think it has to be fluctuations in solar energy collection because that's like it's going up and down and it's inconsistent, similar to what I was guessing. By the way, I would recommend just like guessing an answer before you read the choices and then trying to find an answer that's similar in meaning to what you said. And it's not always going to work, but it'll work a lot and it'll make you more confident when you find an answer choice that matches what you were thinking. We are done with craft and structure. We are on to information and ideas. Round of applause for us. Sorry. A lot of talking. Okay, which choice best states the main idea of the text? Main idea questions, I think you have to read the whole text. In present day Chiapas, Mexico, archaeologist, this guy, remote sensing specialist, this guy, and colleagues, okay, all these different people in Mexico, located 41 smaller settlements surrounding an ancient Mesopotamian city of Izapa. Okay, so they found a bunch of little settlements around a city. Okay, cool. So they're like diggers, you know? The researchers have concluded that the settlements were culturally linked to Izapa. Oh, look, it's surrounding the city of Izapa. And they're saying it's not just surrounding it, they're actually culturally linked. So surrounded and culturally linked to Izapa because each of the settlements is the same age and configured in the same manner as Izapa. It's like similar to Izapa with a pyramid in the north and a plaza to the south. So it's they're like they look similar basically to Izapa. So he's saying that they're culturally linked and they're from the same time period. Their shared structural orientation suggests that residents of the settlement likely performed some of the same cultural ceremonies as residents in Izapa did. Okay, what's the main idea? I would say the main idea is like these people um, found settlements that they learned were culturally linked to the city that they surrounded. Something like that. Researchers have determined that the arrangement of Izapa's structures were based on those of other nearby settlements. Definitely not. It has the relationship the opposite way. They're saying, or at least the connotation, is that the surrounding settlements were inspired by the major city. A is saying that the major city is based on the nearby settlements. No. B. Cultural ceremonies in Izapa seem to have played a more important role for its residents than those in smaller surrounding settlements did. This is just complete fabrication. Okay, so A reverses the relationship. That's what A is doing. B is just making shit up, right? Straight up. Although archaeologists have learned much about Izapa over years of research, they've only recently found the smaller settlements that surrounded it. In present, is that true? They located 41 smaller settlements surrounding the ancient Mesopotamian city. We don't have any time period. This could have happened a really long time ago. Although archaeologists have learned much about Izapa, we also don't know that this is true. This is not supported. We don't know that we know a lot about Izapa, do we? Do we? Link to Izapa, each of the same. We do know some things about Izapa. Learned so much about Izapa over years of research, like years of this feels unsupported. This feels like a stretch, like beyond the text. Okay, hopefully this is clear to you. Like I'm nitpicking because the right answer shouldn't have anything to nitpick. So if there's stuff to nitpick, that means the answer is probably wrong. Okay, researchers have inferred that Izapa was inferred is nice. Okay, I like that word because inferred is like they're not saying for sure. They're saying like they're like kind of guessing, like an educated guess. That's softer. That's a weaker claim. And on the SAT, we love weak claims because they're easier to defend. Researchers have inferred that Izapa was related to the smaller settlements that surrounded it based in part on the similarity of their construction. That was one part of it, right? The other parts were the age, and the other part was, I think that was it actually. I think it was just like the structure and the age. Okay, D is definitely the right answer. So here, we had to read the whole thing. You're noticing a bit of a trend, like a lot of these, you have to read the whole thing, but not all of them, not all of them. And it's important to know which ones you don't to save time, because I always struggle with time on these sections. Okay, according to the text. So here we're on to a section of the SAT that I call like direct questions or direct inferences. So I'm actually giving two examples of like the same type of thing, um, because these types of questions, I don't think you need to read the whole thing. I think you need to read the question and then look for the answer as fast as possible. Okay, so here's an example. According to the text, how old was the fossil that Wang and colleagues discovered? Okay, so I see a few numbers. I know the answer is going to be a number. I see this, and I see this. So which one did Wang and colleagues discover? Oh, here. Wang and colleagues discovered the earliest known example of a flower bud in a 164 million year old plant fossil in China. So I think it's 164 million. Right, I think that's just it. And we could look ahead and just make sure that these numbers are not associated with Wang and colleagues. Um, they believe back in the Jurassic World. Yeah, it's definitely 164. So this is just like a direct detail question. The reason you don't need to read the whole text is because this one is about details. Okay, you just have to find the detail and answer the question. Okay, let's look at this one. This one's a little bit different than the last one, but similar approach, basically the same approach. The only difference between this question and the last one, which I'll remind you, this is a very direct question, straight up, like how old was the fossil? This one is, what does the text most strongly suggest about the songs sung by Rainey and Smith? So it's kind of like we're looking for something that's implied. Okay, that's the difference. So what I'm looking for is, where does it mention Rainey and Smith? I see Rainey and Smith here. Okay. Analysis. Davis bases her analysis on recordings of songs sung by Rainey and Smith. Davis focuses on how they improvise their lyrics, replacing original lines with jokes and wordplay, mischievous jokes and wordplay. So it seems like these two were kind of funny and clever. Davis's work was particularly labor intensive because in order to transcribe or write down the lyrics as Rainey and Smith sang them, she had to listen repeatedly to the vinyl recordings, which weren't very clear. Okay, so we know that they're like kind of clever and cheeky, and we know that this person Davis had to like transcribe all of their stuff, and that wasn't so easy. Okay, what does it suggest about the songs sung by Rainey and Smith? The songs have grown in popularity. We didn't see anything about that. So no, there were more recordings made of Rainey's songs than of Smith's. That's completely made up. There were few, if any, reliable transcripts of Smith's and Rainey's improvised lyrics when Davis began her research. Hell yeah. Absolutely. That's implied. How do we know that's implied? Because she had to sit and transcribe all of them. That blows. She wouldn't have had to do that if there were already reliable transcriptions, right? According to Davis, the songs sung by Rainey were more musically innovative than by Smith. There's no bifurcation. They never separate Rainey and Smith in this text, as far as I could tell. Okay, they never say Rainey did this and Smith did that. It's always them together. So anything that's like separating the two of them is going to be wrong. Next up, command of evidencia. These are the scariest to a lot of students, and I understand why. I mean, these are tricky. These are really tricky. But here's my recommendation. You should learn a lot from the graph or table before you read anything in the text. So like look for the key trends and then try to put the text into context, into the context of the graph. Okay, so look at this with me. And let's pick out some key patterns that we see. We have control and we have the nitrogen fertilizer. We're measuring them over the course of years, 3 years, and yield is pounds per acre. Okay, whatever. Yield is like a good thing. We want high cantaloupe yield. So basically in 2018, it looks like cantaloupe yield rose overall, and then it shrunk down in 2019. So that's one trend, is that it was like kind of middling in 2017, it rose in 2018, it went down in 2019. Okay, that's trend number one. Trend number two, nitrogen fertilizer is always higher than control. And it looks like it's by a similar amount, right? It's a consistent gain of like about 9 or 10 pounds per acre. So that's kind of cool. So nitrogen fertilizer is always better and always by the same amount, roughly the same amount. Okay, those are like kind of the key takeaways that I would say you should have in mind before reading a word of this. This is how I like to approach it. Okay. To test the effects of a nitrogen fertilizer on cantaloupe production, by the way, we already know it's going to have a positive effect because we read the graph. Researchers grew cantaloupe plants and harvested their fruit over 3 years. We know. In each year, half the plants were grown using a nitrogen fertilizer, the other half were using control that contained no nitrogen. They concluded that the nitrogen fertilizer increases cantaloupe yield. Which data describes that? How do we know? Maybe because the nitrogen fertilizer bar is higher in every single year than the control. How about that? How about that for an answer? In every year of the experiment, plants treated with nitrogen fertilizer had a yield of at least 30 pounds per acre. This is not true because in 2019 it's below 30, right? B, it doesn't matter because all of this has to be comparative to the control group. You understand? Like even if this was true, it would still be wrong because that's not how you conclude that nitrogen fertilizer increases cantaloupe yield. You need to show that it's better than control, not just that it grows by not just that it achieves a certain metric. You have to compare, okay? In every year of the experiment, plants treated with the nitrogen fertilizer had a greater yield than did plants treated with the control. Exactly. This is the answer. For sure. For sure. For sure. Now, as a matter of protocol, you should definitely read C and D, and we're going to do that. In 2018, yield for plants treated with the control fertilizer was greater than the 2019 yield for plants treated with a nitrogen fertilizer. That's irrelevant. It's getting too into the weeds. Like, B is way better. In 2018, yield for plants treated with control, this bar right here, was greater than the 2019. That's true, but it's actually counter evidence, if anything. Like that gives the wrong idea. The yield for plants treated with the nitrogen fertilizer increased from 2017 to 2018. Irrelevant because it's not comparing it to the control group. So B is definitely the right answer. Cool. Let's keep going. Command of evidence. Which, if true, these are tough. These are tough, but you have to approach these the right way. You usually don't need to read the whole text. Okay? What we need to do here is find the student's conclusion and then read the answers. So what is the student's conclusion? Usually it's toward the end of the text. Here it is. A student argues that the emotionality of movie reviews is unrelated to a movie's success at the box office. Usually it's toward the end. You have to look for words like in conclusion or his finding or his he argues. Any kind of language like that is usually what you're looking for, and usually it's toward the end of the text. Now that we know that what his conclusion is, we could talk about what would weaken it. Okay, so he's arguing that the emotionality, how passionate, let's say, a movie review is, does not affect or is not related to the movie's success. What would weaken that? Weaken, I don't know, maybe some counter evidence would be like, we did a study and it turns out that having really emotional movie reviews is highly correlated to movie success. More emotional reviews lead to more success. Something like that would weaken the student's conclusion. That would be counter argument or counter evidence. Movies that have the highest average emotionality scores receive the lowest average star rating of the movie rating website. This is a good answer because it's not arguing whether there's a positive or negative relationship. It's arguing that the student's arguing that there's no relationship. It's unrelated. This is saying there is a relationship and it's negative. More emotional means worse performance. Now, caveat. Okay, we're always looking for why an answer might be wrong. Here's why it might be wrong and why I'm gonna just hold it for now. Movie rating website versus box office. Box office is like how much money it makes. Movie rating website is like Rotten Tomatoes, where people are just kind of voting. These are different things. So I could argue that this actually does not counter the student's argument. It doesn't weaken his argument. Interesting. We're going to hold this. We're putting you on hold. You're like a library book. The average emotionality score of a movie reviews was a positive predictor of the movie's box office earnings. This is a better answer because we're talking about box office earnings. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be the right answer, which I'll highlight green. But again, we've been fooled before. So let's keep going. More than half of the movies that the team examined received an average star rating of 3 out of 5. That does not matter because it doesn't say anything about the emotionality. So it's just saying a lot of the movies got 3 out of 5s. That's irrelevant. The movies that were most successful in the box office tend to have high average star ratings. Again, nothing about emotionality. That's just saying like the movies that people like tend to make the most money. Okay, that's almost like trivial. Of course that's true. Drop in the comments what movies I should see. Okay, so B is definitely the right answer. A was a great trap answer. They almost had me. If I was impatient or if I was like running out of time on the test and I only had time to read the first answer, I probably would have chosen it. But movie rating website versus box office, these are two different things. So it doesn't really weaken the student's argument. So here you see we didn't have to read any of this. None of it, none of it, none of it. So we actually saved a lot of time. I know like I'm talking through every single answer, so I'm still taking my time with it, but we didn't have to read all this stuff or understand it. We just had to read his claim at the end and then go to work. Inferences. Okay, inferences, it's really important to read the whole thing. And I would strongly argue against anyone who disagrees with that. And this one's really short, so it's not going to be painful. But even in the long text, when you're dealing with an inference question, meaning which choice most logically completes the text, they always look like this. Read the whole text. Marine archaeologists have found much of the wooden hull of a 16th century ship in a flooded quarry in southern England. Okay, so they found a lot of an old ship. When it is exposed to air and water, wood rots quickly unless it's protected by sediment that shields it from oxygen. Therefore, the discovered ship was likely. Okay, they just said that it's from the 16th century. That's 1500s. So if they were able to find a lot of it, it means that it was well preserved. And it's saying that typically wood wouldn't last that long, right? That's what it's implying anyway. When it's exposed to air and water, it rots quickly unless it's protected by sediment. So the discovered ship was likely protected by sediment, covered by a protective sediment layer in the quarry. Yeah, right. It's kind of obvious. Like if you're not able to guess what the right answer is to these, you probably don't understand the text well enough. Okay, I know that's like a harsh truth, but I really feel like it's true. I haven't seen a question, an inference question where if I understood it well, I wasn't able to guess the answer. Typically, if I can't guess the answer, it's because I don't understand the text well enough. Because it sets it up. It's like a lob in basketball. It's like a lob, and you're just waiting to jump and slam dunk. Okay, one of several other ships buried in the same quarry. Not no, there's no indication of that. A confirmation of previous theories about the type of wood that was used. No, nothing about the type of wood. Right? Uh, Wood rots quickly. It's not talking about certain types of wood. First constructed much earlier than previously thought. If anything, no. Like definitely not. Why would it be like from why would it be earlier than previously thought? That doesn't make any sense. If anything, if it was earlier, then you would expect it to be in worse condition. So that's no. It is definitely the right answer here. And you have to read the whole thing. You need to understand what they're setting up. They're setting up something for you to slam. Okay, it's easy if you understand it. Okay, standard English conventions. Um, I'm actually not even going to go through these because there's no trick. The trick, like, I'm going to show you one trick. Actually, I'm lying. There are tricks to grammar problems, which is what standard English conventions is. And there's two types. There's boundaries, which is basically punctuation problems, and then form, structure, and sense, which is usually like verb type or verb tense, things like that. Um, there are some tricks, and they're really popular. Everybody knows them basically. If you follow SAT content on YouTube or Reddit or anywhere, um, I'll mention one. But the trick is just to know the grammar rules for these. Like you need to know the way commas are used and the way periods are used and the way colons and semicolons and dashes. Like there's no way around that really. So I'm gonna link in the description my ultimate super grammar guide. You should check it out. It's free. All of it's free. Everything's free except for my tutoring. If you want to hire me to tutor you, it's not free. Um, okay, here there is a trick. Which choice completes the text? Yada yada. Um, there's the it they test, which I think a lot of you probably know, but I'll show it to you anyway. Um, and I call this minority rule based off of that movie with Tom Cruise, I think, like Minority Report, whatever. This is minority rule. So whichever one there's only one of is going to be the right answer. So you try putting the word it before all of them. It focuses, it focus, it are focused, it were focused. Only this makes sense. You try putting they focuses does not make sense. They focus, they are focused, they were focused. That they works for the other three. So the one that only has one that works is going to be the right answer. So it's going to be focuses. And these are always like, this is a singular versus plural type of question. So the thing that we're talking about, although each one of these plays focuses, each one singular, it focuses, each of them focus, or sorry, each one of these plays focuses on a single historical figure. I could actually see how this would be super confusing if you don't know the minority rule. Because each one of these plays, it's like really complicated to figure out if that's like supposed to be singular or plural because it's each one, but then these plays, like you've got to blend, which is why this is a level 3 difficulty question. But in the Ultimate Grammar Guide that's linked in the description, I have these rules, and I have another blog post dedicated to these like quick and dirty rules that I'll also link. I think it's called Minority Rule, so I'll link that in the description. Also, I have a bunch of blog posts on these types of problems and the way that I would solve them. So yeah, look in the description. There's going to be a lot of resources that you're going to want to use after watching this. Okay, home stretch. Expression of ideas, rhetorical synthesis. I call these the bullet point problems. Um, the way that I would go about these is read the question and only read the first sentence because the last sentence is always which choice most effectively used is relevant. You don't have to read it every time. You don't ever have to read it. If you see bullet points, the question is all in the first sentence. The student wants to specify how many chromosomes the pineapple has. The answer needs to have a number, okay? how many chromosomes the pineapple has. So if the answer doesn't have a number, it can't be right. So I'm ignoring all of this, right? I'm not even reading it right now. I'm just looking at the answer choices to see, like, is there only one answer that makes any sense? The pineapple's chromosomes contain genes which are critical determining an organism's physical traits. You know what that doesn't have? A number. Okay, so that's wrong. I should make it red because green doesn't feel like a wrong answer. The pineapple has 50 chromosomes. Beautiful. Yes. Okay, let's read on. The pineapple and the melon both have chromosomes, but the pineapple has more. Okay, that doesn't tell me how many chromosomes the pineapple has, so no go. The melon, a species of fruit, has 24 structures called chromosomes. Okay, that's a melon, but what about the pineapple? What about the humble pineapple? Okay, so B is definitely the answer because it's the only one that answers the prompt, right? Sometimes you're going to have two or three answers that answer the prompt, and then you'll have to look back at the bullet points to verify which ones are actually in there because they'll give you information that's just fabricated on the harder questions. So sometimes you will have to look back if there's multiple answers that seem to work, but start with the answers because you could often just eliminate two or three of them off the bat. All right, that's it. Last one, transitions. I have a whole blog post on transitions that I'm also going to link in the description. This is going to be a thick description because there's going to be a lot of links. Okay, with transitions, you basically need to understand how every transition is used. You don't need to be able to say it. Like, you don't have to be able to explain to your friend how it's used necessarily, but you need to know when it fits and when it doesn't. So let's take a look and try to see what would make sense to put in the blank. A 2017 study of sign language learners tested the role of iconicity. Okay, sign language learners tested the role of this thing, the similarity of a sign and the thing it represents. Okay, now we're talking. I don't know any sign language, but let's just say that this meant walking. That would be a similarity of a sign to the thing it represents, because this looks like walking. As a non sign language speaker, I would guess that that meant walking, right? Whereas if this meant walking, I'd probably have to memorize that. I wouldn't, that's not instinctive or intuitive at all. Okay. So the similarity of a sign to the thing it represents in language acquisition. Okay. So that's what iconicity is. It's how much the sign matches to the meaning. The study found that the greater the iconicity of a sign, the more likely it was to have been learned. Duh. Do we really need to hire researchers to figure this out? Because, okay. Anyway, blank. The correlation between acquisition and iconicity was lower than that between acquisition and other factors studied, sign frequency. Ooh. So it turns out that sign frequency has an even stronger correlation with learning than iconicity does. So it's kind of like a however. Like first we're saying like iconicity is super useful and it helps people learn, but actually there's this other thing that helps people even more. So it's kind of like a however. It's not exactly rejecting that iconicity is useful. It's still useful, but there's another thing that's even more useful. Okay, so in fact, I don't think in fact really works here. In fact, because we're not getting more into the topic of iconicity. We're not zooming in on iconicity. We're actually like going to contrast it sort of with something else. In other words, definitely not in other words. We're not reiterating the same thing. Where if anything, we're sort of like rejecting it, kind of like caveating. Caveating is probably the best way I could say it. Granted, granted sounds good. And as a result, definitely doesn't work. As a result, no, definitely not as a result. Granted's got to be the right answer, and that makes some sense. Granted, iconicity is good. Granted, the correlation between acquisition and iconicity was lower than between acquisition and other factors studied. Sign frequency. Yeah, granted looks good to me. So, read the blog post on transitions. It kind of groups them by category. So, I don't know. I don't know if you need to group them by category. I think that you need to understand what they mean and understand how they're used. Um, All that said, I see a lot of students struggle with the reading and writing section. Most students do not struggle the most in transitions. Usually transitions are like not as bad. Um anyway, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. This is a new and growing channel. I'm taking on SAT students. If you're looking for a private tutor, I'm happy to work with you. Just reach out. I have my website. I have Pattern SAT. This is the website I've been using to go through all these problems. This is a website that I created and launched very recently. I think it's really good as an educational resource. It's all completely free. Again, everything I do is free except for my one-on-one tutoring. So, yeah, if you found this helpful, like, subscribe, comment below if you found any of this particularly helpful or if you disagree with my approach to anything. I'm really curious. I love discussing this stuff. This is like my passion. So, yeah, have an awesome day and good luck studying for the SAT.